In June 1812, Napoleon assembles the largest army Europe has ever seen, ready to shatter Russia and enforce his will across the continent. Instead of battle, his enemies vanish into the endless plains, torching food and villages as they go. Was this the beginning of conquest, or a trap only now closing shut? On June 24, 1812, the Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River, stepping onto Russian soil with an ambition that dwarfed any previous campaign. Napoleon's motive was clear. He wanted to punish Russia for abandoning the continental system and to restore the blockade against British trade. Behind that decision stood not only a personal rivalry with Tsar Alexander I, but also the belief that economic isolation would bring Britain to its knees. The force assembled for this invasion was unmatched in European memory. Official bulletins from Napoleon's headquarters claimed over 600,000 men, an army so vast that it seemed to swallow the horizon. Modern historians, sifting through surviving rolls and supply returns, placed the number closer to 450,000 to 600,000. The exact figure remains a matter of debate, but even the lowest estimate makes the Grande Armée the largest force ever to march under a single command. This was not a purely French army. Troops came from across the empire and its allies. Poles, Germans, Italians, Austrians, and Prussians marched in French ranks, some by choice, others by treaty or coercion. One of Napoleon's aides later wrote, "It was not a French army that crossed the Niemen, but a European one." As the columns advanced in 5 great streams, the scale of the enterprise became clear. Supply wagons, artillery, and cavalry stretched for miles. Officers and soldiers alike expected a swift campaign, one grand battle to force the Tsar to negotiate. Instead, they found empty roads and villages stripped bare. The invasion had begun, but the enemy refused to stand and fight. Barclay de Tolly, commanding the Russian First Army, refused to give Napoleon the decisive battle he wanted. Instead, he issued orders in late June for a systematic withdrawal, abandoning Vilna and pulling his forces deeper into the Russian interior. As they retreated, Russian troops set fire to supply depots, grain stores, and even entire villages. Nothing useful was left behind. Roads that once supported local trade became lines of ash and ruin. This was not a panicked flight, but a calculated strategy, one designed to starve the invaders before the campaign truly began. Cossack cavalry, skilled in irregular warfare, swept through the countryside. Under leaders like Denis Davidov, they struck French foraging parties and isolated columns, vanishing before any organized response. For Napoleon's men, foraging, a tactic that had sustained them in past campaigns, became a deadly gamble. Reports filtered back to headquarters of small detachments disappearing, wagons burned, and wounded men left behind. French officers complained that every village was empty, every barn door barred, every field stripped bare. Grain and livestock vanished ahead of their advance. The Russian High Command understood the cost of this policy. Destroying their own land meant hardship for civilians and soldiers alike. Yet for Barclay and his staff, denying the Grande Armée supplies was the only way to offset French numbers and discipline. With every mile the French marched, their supply lines grew longer and weaker, while Russian partisans and Cossacks kept the pressure constant. By the end of June, the invasion no longer resembled a conventional campaign. It had become a war of attrition, fought as much by fire and hunger as by musket and saber. The Grande Armée's progress slowed long before the first frost. With every step deeper into Russia, the supply chain stretched thinner, over 400 miles now separating the vanguard from its main depots. Wagons broke down or were abandoned as roads turned to dust or mud, and the loss of horses became a crisis. By late July, tens of thousands of animals had died from exhaustion, hunger, and disease. Without horses, artillery and food convoys stalled, and soldiers were forced to march on empty stomachs. A quartermaster's report from August captured the mood. "We are reduced to eating the flesh of dead horses. The men are weakened, the animals gone. Disease swept through the ranks as sanitation collapsed. Typhus and dysentery spread in crowded camps and along the marching columns, fueled by contaminated water and the heat of summer. Even before reaching Smolensk, tens of thousands had fallen ill or died. Official returns show that by August, the Central Army had lost nearly 80,000 men to sickness alone. For many, death came not from battle, but from unseen enemies, hunger, thirst, and disease. The myth that only winter destroyed Napoleon's army fades under these numbers. The Grande Armée was already bleeding away, undone by a logistical puzzle it could not solve. Smolensk stood on the Dnieper River, its ancient walls battered by artillery from August 16th to 18th, 1812. Napoleon's forces surrounded the city, expecting to finally pin down the Russian armies and force the battle he had chased across hundreds of miles. The fighting raged, street by street, smoke choking the air as French troops pressed forward. By the third day, Smolensk fell. Flames consumed much of the city, but the Russians, under Barclay de Tolly, slipped away eastward through the chaos, taking their wounded and most of their supplies with them. The French had paid for the ruins with thousands of casualties, but the decisive victory Napoleon needed remained out of reach. Instead of a trapped enemy, he found empty streets and another long, open road ahead. Staff officers noted the toll in their diaries. Men collapsed in the rubble, exhausted and hungry, their boots worn through. For all its violence, Smolensk offered only a brief pause. The Russian army still lived to fight again, and the Grande Armée's losses could not be replaced. At dawn on September 7, 1812, the fields near Borodino erupted with cannon fire and marching columns. For 12 relentless hours, wave after wave of French infantry and cavalry hurled themselves against Russian earthworks and redoubts. The air thickened with smoke, the thunder of artillery never letting up. By sunset, the ground was soaked with blood and littered with the bodies of men and horses. Russian casualties reached nearly 45,000. Dead, wounded, or missing, while French losses ran nearly as high, draining the Grande Armée of its remaining strength. A French grenadier later wrote that they advanced, bayonets fixed, over ground so thick with corpses that the living stumbled with every step. Both armies reeled from the carnage, but neither side broke. Kutuzov ordered a withdrawal that night, his battered army still intact. Napoleon stood on a field of devastation, victorious in name only. The road to Moscow lay open, but the price paid at Borodino could never be recovered. The Grande Armée marched on, its ranks thinned and its spirit wounded, carrying the scars of the bloodiest single day of the campaign. On September 14, 1812, French troops marched into Moscow, expecting to claim a prize worthy of peace negotiations. Instead, they found a city stripped of life, homes abandoned, markets empty, and the streets echoing with silence. Almost overnight, flames erupted across the skyline. The fire's origin remains debated. Some blamed Russian arson, others blamed French carelessness, but most accounts point to a deliberate act, an extension of the scorched-earth policy that had haunted the French since the border. By the time the smoke cleared, 3/4 of Moscow lay in ruins. A Russian civilian forced to flee with her family later wrote, "We left behind our house, our city, everything. When we looked back, the sky was red." Napoleon waited in the ashes for a Russian envoy, but none arrived. With no supplies, no shelter, and winter approaching, he ordered the retreat on October 18th. The advance had ended. Now began a desperate escape. At the Berezina River in late November, the last hope of escape turned into a nightmare. The banks were choked with thousands of desperate soldiers, camp followers, and shattered wagons. Russian armies pressed from both sides, and the only way across was a pair of makeshift bridges, thrown together by Dutch engineer pontonniers under General Eberl. Temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Celsius. Men waded into the icy water, hauling timber and boats, hands turning numb, faces stung by wind and gunfire. The first bridge collapsed twice under the crush of artillery and fleeing crowds. Panic spread as Russian shells exploded among the masses. A French survivor recalled, "We trampled the dead and dying, the river ran black with bodies." In 3 days, thousands drowned, froze, or were cut down. The Grande Armée crossed, but at the cost of its soul. The Berezina became a byword for disaster, a river of death, sealing Napoleon's defeat in Russia.
Of the more than 600,000 soldiers who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. The disaster shattered Napoleon's army and marked the beginning of the end of his empire. Within 2 years, the emperor who dominated Europe would lose his throne.
Empires still rise and gamble on force, but supply lines and local resistance remain decisive. Today, even the strongest power can collapse from misjudging distance, will, and winter. History keeps warning. Ambition meets its limit not on maps, but in the realities no army can command.